In this video, we're going to be covering the endocrine system. Information about the endocrine system can be also found in your OpenStax textbook in Chapter 17. As always, please use this as your primary source, this lecture. But if there's anything you do not understand or you want a little bit more content and background on, I encourage you to check out your OpenStax textbook. And as always, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. By the end of this video, I'm actually going to break the endocrine system up into a couple of little videos so that there's not like one 60-minute long video that you're watching. So by the end of this first video, I want you to be able to identify the major endocrine glands and distinguish them from the exocrine glands. I want you to, at some point, we're skipping numbers here, differentiate among endocrine, autocrine, and paracrine signaling. And then I want you to be able to compare the endocrine and nervous systems in terms of communication and function. Let me introduce you to the organs that make up the endocrine system. And this is an area that I'm going to fly through here in lecture because we're going to spend a lot of time on it in lab. Because this course is so condensed, I didn't want to kind of overwhelm you with a whole lot of information in both. And so I will reserve many details for the lab. However, it is still something that you will see on your lecture test. So if you have questions about it, please communicate with me or ask in lab. Make sure you know it for both lab and for lecture. Okay, so let's start with the structures that are located within the brain. Okay, so we'll start with the pineal gland. The pineal gland is located on the posterior aspect of the diencephalon, and it produces a hormone called melatonin. And melatonin is a hormone produced by the pineal gland in your brain that helps regulate your sleep-wake cycles. So this hormone is going to be increased during the later parts of the day because it is the hormone that makes us a little sleepy and drowsy. It helps us in that transition to sleep. Okay. We have the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is a vital control center that produces many hormones that are going to regulate the production or inhibition of hormones that are created in the pituitary gland. Okay. Then we have the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland is located on the anterior aspect of the hypothalamus. It actually just kind of descends from it anteriorly. Okay. The pituitary gland is this pea-sized organ that is going to be responsible for secreting many hormones that affect many bodily functions. And so the hormones that are produced here are going to affect things like growth, sexual development and reproduction, milk production, how we respond to stress, our stress hormones. So it plays a huge role in many of those hormones that are produced. It also, there's different parts of the pituitary gland. As you'll learn in lab, we have the anterior portion and we have the posterior portion. And the posterior portion releases hormones that are going to have other effects on the body. So oxytocin is one that could impact uterine contractility. And then we have antidiuretic hormone, which is going to affect water reabsorption. So those are just some examples of hormones that are produced by that particular portion of the pituitary gland. Okay, as we move down, okay, located right under the larynx, we have this butterfly-shaped gland referred to as the thyroid gland. Okay, it is going to produce thyroid hormone. And thyroid hormone affects metabolism and pretty much targets every cell in the body. Okay, it does things like increase our basal metabolic rate and body heat production, and it can affect our glucose oxidation. All right. Thyroid hormone is critical for normal skeletal and nervous system development, and maturation. Now, the thyroid gland is also going to produce another hormone called calcitonin. And calcitonin is important for decreasing our blood calcium levels when our blood calcium levels get too high. So this is released when those levels are high to help reduce those blood calcium levels. On the posterior aspect of the thyroid gland, we have these small little glands. Excuse me. We have these small little glands called parathyroid glands. There's about 4 that are going to be located behind the thyroid gland, and then some individuals, depending on their genetics, may have 2 to 4 more kind of located throughout different parts of their neck. Parathyroid gland is going to be responsible for secreting parathyroid hormone. And parathyroid hormone has the ability to increase blood calcium levels when the levels are too low. All right, as we move down, we have the thymus, and the thymus is an endocrine gland that produces hormones that are going to affect and cause the maturation of our lymphocytes. Okay, so it has an important role with the immune system. We also have adrenal glands, and adrenal glands are sometimes called the suprarenal glands because they're located on the superior aspect of the kidneys. Okay, so here are our kidneys, and these are our adrenal glands. Okay. Structurally and functionally, the adrenal glands kind of look like 2 separate glands. Okay. We have an inner region of the adrenal gland that we refer to as the medulla. And here we're going to produce the hormones norepinephrine and epinephrine, okay, which are going to be released in response to our fight or flight response, okay? And then we have the outer region known as the cortex, and here we're going to have many of our steroid hormones being produced. We also have the pancreas, which is this tadpole-shaped organ here, that is going to produce hormones that are going to affect our blood glucose levels. Whether we are, asking ourselves to take in the blood glucose to lower levels in the blood, or if we're needing blood glucose because of an activity we're doing or whatever is going on in our body, to release those blood glucose levels, okay? Or release that blood glucose into the blood. The pancreas is going to be responsible for secreting the hormones insulin, which is going to reduce blood glucose levels, and glucagon, which is going to increase blood glucose levels, okay? And then last but certainly not least, we have the ovaries and the testes, which are our gonads. Ovaries in females, the testes in males. They're going to be responsible for secreting our sex hormones. The ovaries will secrete estrogen, and the testes will secrete testosterone. Now, the endocrine system is going to partner with the nervous system to coordinate and integrate and control communication throughout our body, okay? And some of the functions are going to include growth and metabolism. We talked about, no we didn't. We didn't talk about growth hormone, but that pituitary gland is going to secrete growth hormone, which is going to affect growth and metabolism. We did talk about thyroid hormone and how it affects metabolism. We have, it's going to control the development of our reproductive organs. We talked about those sex hormones that play a role with that. It's going to regulate our response to stress. It's going to regulate some of the changes that happen with our blood chemistry in terms of molecules or ions that may fall outside of the threshold, like for example, if blood calcium is too low, or if sodium is too low, or blood sugar is too low. There are hormones that typically released by the endocrine system can help kind of regulate that. We talked about the thymus gland and how it plays a role with the immune system in the development and maturation of those lymphocytes. So it's going to play a role with our body defenses. Okay. And so hormones are the special chemicals that are going to be used to kind of help the endocrine system do what it does. Okay. So, insulin is a hormone that is going to reduce blood glucose levels. Okay. Cortisol is a hormone that is going to maybe affect our response to stress, but not only that, also inflammation. Okay. Growth hormone is going to nearly target all cells within our body in its impact in the growth of our cells in our tissues. And so the hormones that are produced by the system, yes, they work with the nervous system to integrate and control other systems, but ultimately they play a huge role in kind of how we feel, what we look like, how we behave. It modulates many different bodily functions that give rise to this. In fact, the goal of the endocrine system is to promote overall wellness and to pretty much maintain homeostasis, balance within the body. So let's talk about the general characteristics of the endocrine system, okay? The glands that make up the endocrine system usually consist of epithelial glandular tissue. There is one exception, and we'll talk about that in lab, where there's a part of the pituitary gland that's not glandular, but that's something we'll definitely kind of hit there. The glands that make up the endocrine system are typically smaller in nature, and when you look at their distribution throughout the body, they are widely scattered, and you guys probably saw that, and you can obviously go back a couple of slides and kind of see how scattered the glands are. They're not very close together in any sense. The only two, or I'll say three, that are pretty close are the pineal gland, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary gland. Most organs are going to be true organs in that they stand alone. They are their own organ by themselves. But there are other organs that are going to be part of an organ. Okay, so an example of this would be the parathyroid organs, which are a part of the thyroid organ. Okay, another example of this would be the adrenal glands, which are located on the superior surface of the kidneys. Okay, what makes the endocrine system is that it is a ductless system. Okay, and what that means is that these organs have the ability to deposit their contents directly into the bloodstream. Okay, and the hormones that are secreted into the bloodstream can travel to their target locations and do their thing. Okay, the exocrine system is a system that features ducts. Okay, and so those organs are going to deposit their contents into a duct, and that duct is going to carry those contents to wherever it's going to the body. Okay, so that's the main difference between the endocrine and exocrine system. One features ducts, the exocrine, and one does not, and that is the endocrine. So here in this table, you can see a concise comparison between the endocrine and nervous system. The nervous system is going to respond to neurotransmitters, whereas the endocrine system is going to respond to hormones. Okay, the signaling mechanisms for the endocrine system are going to be chemical, whereas the signaling mechanisms for the nervous system can either be chemical or electrical. When we think about the action potentials that are generated, the conductivity that is generated, that allows for messaging to be passed from cell to cell. The nervous system is going to respond pretty quickly, and it does that because the distances between the cells are fairly short, and so communication is pretty rapid. Okay, whereas the endocrine system, the glands that produce the hormones are going to be deposited to the bloodstream, and that allows for there to be a delayed response, because if the hormone has to travel a long distance, it may take a little while. And so the response may be slower, okay? But typically, because it is deposited into the blood, the response can be sustained for longer periods of time, okay? And so that's a major thing that's pretty different from the nervous system, okay? Now, what I will say is that the endocrine system is typically going to respond to internal stimuli, internal chemical changes that occur within the body, whereas the nervous system has sensory receptors that can process stimuli in the internal and external environment. The last thing I'll note is that endocrine signaling is typically less specific than neural signaling. The same hormone within the endocrine system may play a role in a variety of different physiological processes depending on the target cells that are involved. So for example, the hormone oxytocin can promote uterine contractions during labor, but it also can impact kind of the release of prolactin during breastfeeding, okay? So it just depends. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Hormones are chemical messengers of the endocrine system. They are deposited directly into the blood or the lymph, and they can travel long distances to their target cells. Now, there are other chemical messengers that influence the functions of the endocrine system, and honestly, broadly influence functions throughout the body that are not hormones, and we, for simplicity, are going to refer to them as our local messengers, okay? We have autocrines, which are going to exert effects on the same cells that secrete them. An example of this would be the prostaglandins that are released by cells to kind of control their own ability to contract. We also have prostaglandins that may be released in response to inflammation of their own cells, okay? And then we have paracrines, which are going to exert their effects on nearby cells. And so you may have heard of histamine, for example, especially when you think of like an allergic reaction. Histamine is a paracrine that is released by mast cells during an allergic response. Please note again that hormones are the chemical messengers of the endocrine system. Autocrines and paracrines are local chemical messengers that are not necessarily considered part of the endocrine system, but may impact the actions of the endocrine system. All right, so let's talk a little bit about hormones just generally. All right, hormones can be steroid-based, which just means they consist of steroid, okay, or amino-based, or amino acid-based, which means they consist of amino acids. They're going to be carried via the blood because it is endocrine, it is ductless. They're going to be deposited directly into the blood. And they're going to affect the target by changing protein synthesis or enzyme activity. Target cells are going to contain a specific receptor on the cell membrane or within the cell that can interact with the hormone, so the hormone can change the activities of that particular cell. If there is no receptor compatible for the hormone, then the hormone will not be activated. Well, we can classify hormones based on their structure. We have amino acid-based hormones, which are non-steroid hormones. They can be made up of amino acid derivatives. They could be made up of small peptides, or they could be made up of proteins. We also have steroid hormones, which are built from cholesterol, okay? And typically this is going to include both our gonadal and adrenocortical hormones, okay? And those are hormones that are produced within the adrenal cortex. Now, what I will say is that, again, gonadal and adrenocortical hormones are going to be our steroid hormones. Almost all other hormones are going to be amino acid-based hormones, okay? So all the other ones that we'll talk about will be those, all right? Eicosanoids are not true hormones. They're typically going to be some form of a local messenger, whether that's a paracrine or an autocrine. They're going to be important for helping us control many processes like our responses to inflammation, how our blood clots, and even how we respond to injuries. Two examples include leukotrienes that help control your immune system, and then prostaglandins. We talked about how it impacts contraction, but it can also help with pain, fever, and inflammation. All right, so the principal activity of hormones is going to be to alter the target cell activity, whether that is turning on or off, transcription of a particular gene, or influencing or inhibiting the activities of a particular enzyme. Whatever case it may be, the main goal is to alter the target cell's activity, okay? Tissues that consist of target cells are tissues that have receptors for a specific hormone, okay? If those receptors that are present are not compatible with the particular hormone, then the hormone will not be able to alter the target cell's activities, okay? Only cells with proper receptors are affected. Now here are my practice questions for the end of this video. If you have any questions about it, please let me know. But please take some time to kind of go through these questions, reflect on these questions, and come up with some ideas on what you think the answers are to these questions.